Dr. Booker. Welcome to the STEM Lab podcast. We are
Yeah,
so happy to have you.
I'm so happy to be here. I'm
Hey.
super excited about this endeavor. I just love podcasts. I understand that there are the new way for people to receive information and be able to listen to those on the go in your car and in your office. So I'm super excited about the STEM podcast. Two
Well,
things that I
I'm
love.
so glad.
Yes.
Yeah, so I actually I listen to podcasts and I know me and you had this conversation and they like are like best friends in my head. I love hearing, just information like you said on the go. So it definitely keeps me engaged. And that's what I thought about this was that having a podcast where people can be engaged about women like yourself who are in STEM. So let's get right into it today.
Okay.
Um we want to talk to Dr. Booker for our lab mates out there. Dr. Booker is here with us. She is currently working at Mercer University, so we are colleagues as always. I first met Dr. Booker when she was working with the TRIO programs, but she is, I know, right? That seems so long ago because,
Yes.
hey,
I was working with Trio when I first moved to Macon. Oh wow. Mhm.
wow. Yeah, I've been at Mercer for a while, so we've been here for a
I'm like
minute now.
I'm knocking on 10 years. I'm knocking on 10. Well,
Hey,
I made 10 years. I made 10 years in September.
okay, so then we're right, but we're I'm just a year or two ahead of you. I lose count out of 10, but I think I'm like going to the 12th year now. So yeah,
Okay. Good, good, good.
just a few years ahead of each other. So Dr. Booker, in the podcast, we always, we want to give people a 360 well-rounded view of women in STEM, especially women of color. And I want to start out just talking to you about your career. So if you could just tell the listeners what are you currently doing and how did you get to this point?
So, as you previously stated, I'm currently working at Mercer University in Macon, Georgia, and I'm serving as the inaugural director for diversity and inclusion initiatives for the entire university, serving
Mhm.
all of the regional academic campuses as well as our main campuses in Macon and the Atlanta campuses, as it relates to DE and I work, and that involves diversity, equity, justice, and inclusion work for the university. And so that includes trainings, workshops, being able to serve as a resource for our faculty, staff, and students. And so a lot of initiatives, this is my second year, I've pulled through my 5-year strategic plan that really focused on my mission and vision that I have for the office, making sure that people, when I say people, being inclusive with that, alums, current students, faculty, and staff are engaged and actively engaged in DE and I work because again, these are action states. They're not just one moment or one idea or one training. You have to be actively engaged, and not only just with myself in my office, but the entire university, because if you're going to make a cultural climate change or a cultural climate shift, everyone has
Mhm.
to do their job and be aware of their
Right.
biases, be aware of individual policies and practices and procedures that may be barriers to persistence, particularly in our STEM or STEAM disciplines in higher education. So I kind of tackle all of that in a nutshell. I know that was a lot, but a lot of my efforts that I do revolve around research. They revolve around disseminating
Okay.
that research information to the entire university. And then it also revolves around programming and planning. Most oftentimes, I do a lot of talk about implicit bias or unconscious biases. And so again, that showed up in my dissertation and really was the platform for my job or my career in DE&I. I went an alternative route. Most times, a lot of times, people that are working in DE&I are working as sociologists, or they have a background in or particular Africana studies or something like that nature. So again, I just was able to leverage that information that I learned and really took hold of, because again, that was my lived experience as a Black
Okay.
woman in in the deep South and growing up in a rural area. And so I talked a lot about microaggressions. I talked a lot about bias, talked a lot about xenophobia, talked a lot about the gender pay gap, and all those things. Really, when you really boil it down, that's really about what equity is about,
Mhm.
making sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to resources that they need based upon their identity or based upon where they are in their life and life circumstances in their community. So making sure that things are equitable for individuals, and acknowledging disparities in different communities and different marginalized groups.
Right. And so I'm glad to hear you, first of all, mention your dissertation. And so, as I was on your committee, your dissertation was Hidden Figures No More Factors That Contribute to STEM Graduate Degree Attainment in African American Women. And moving from that dissertation, you were then able to pivot yourself into
Yeah.
this leadership position
Hmm.
as the director of diversity and inclusion
Hmm.
initiatives at Mercer. So let's talk a bit just about how your background helped lead you to where you
Yeah.
are now.
Hmm.
Because looking at your CV, you have a BS in biology with a minor in chemistry. You then
Yeah.
have a master in pharmacy, and
Hmm.
then you have your doctorate in education leadership. So
Hmm.
when we talk about pivoting in a career, you
I
have
did like
definitely
a
done it.
360, 720, might some might even say.
The 720. Well, I love it though because it just shows how you do not have to landlock yourself into a traditional thought of what a
Mhm.
STEM career is. And I always tell you, I'm so glad to see how you move because I came along that old school train of thought. So I'm in
Mhm.
STEM. You're going to go along, you're going to become, a professor, then you'll
Mhm.
try and get to chair, and then you'll try and get to dean, and,
Yeah.
work my way. And when I met you, I was like, this young lady is just zooming all around. Like, where's she going? And then when you landed, I was like, oh, I need to
Oh,
take
that's what it is.
several
It
notes
all
from
makes sense.
Dr.
And
Booker.
yes, and it's so crazy that we talk about this. And I thank you again right now. I want to acknowledge that on this on the podcast for serving as a mentor, because
Oh.
out of my dissertation, I found that mentorship, networking, access, financial and economic support, a cohort
Mhm.
model, those things like a introduction to STEM early on, at least by high school. Of course, research says you have to have a STEM identity at least by third grade, because that's when we have that leak in the pipeline, when girls don't see associate STEM and STEM careers with women. And then, we also have these gender roles and these things in our society that tell us that women should not be in science, technology, engineering, mathematics,
Right,
that,
right.
there's a certain ascription to intelligence based upon your gender. And so a lot of the things that I talked about in my dissertation, again, were my lived experiences of other Black women in America and internationally, because I wanted, when I really thought about it, I wanted someone to tell my story. So when I was
Mhm.
going to undergraduate and master's degree program, when I was in my undergraduate program, my master's degree program, love these institutions to death. They were predominantly white institutions. So
Okay.
oftentimes, if it were not for some of my sorority sisters, there are very few Black women, very few Latinx or Hispanic women. And then there were even fewer professors that were either Black or Hispanic or Latinx. Most of these professors that I encountered were either white male, white Asian, or white women, right, in these disciplines. And so
Okay.
with that being said, what I want to pull out, based upon the things that I've experienced, based on the things my friends have experienced, and this is even before the movie Hidden Figures had come out. And I do want to thank those trailblazers that were, really, really told their story and brought our experiences to life, even from the 1960s when this was happening. But
Mhm.
again, these things are still very prominent in our society. And so, with the President Obama administration, they were really talking about, and I'm gonna pull all this together, I promise you, during this time, a little bit after I was in graduate school, there was a push in the Obama administration, like, hey, if we want to be a world power, continue to be a world
Mhm.
power, we have to tap into these underrepresented minorities or these underrepresented individuals in
Right,
STEM. Because
right.
again, what they had forecasted with the Department of Labor, that a lot of the jobs were going to be in cybersecurity, computer science, technology, math, data collection, um, computer science, I already mentioned, science, of course, with statistical advances, us trying to travel further into our solar system universe, us with, meeting new diseases. So again, in science and things of that nature. So again, cultivating things in difficult terrains, trying to cure hunger. I mean, the list goes on and on. But
Right.
a lot of these jobs that we need in order to sustain our economy as the U.S., in order to sustain our environment in the global, as we look towards climate change, a lot of and then of course with the computer and technology divide and movement there, they were looking for more people. So basically what was happening around 2010, 2013 ish era was that there were so many jobs that were being unmet or unfulfilled because there was a gap between the number of students that were graduating with these degrees and the number of jobs that were being rapidly produced, right?
Right.
So there was this big technology boom. And so what you found is that people started thinking and strategizing, hey, where can we go to get more people to fill these jobs, right? So what you look at the data, and the data was showing you that the amount of people that were completing these jobs were white men, Asian men and women, white women. But then it's like, okay, so in our country, we know that we're more than diverse than that. There's Black or African Americans, men and women. You have Hispanic men and women. And so what they were saying was that, okay, and you don't have indigenous persons. So what you were seeing is that these three subgroups, the Black men and women, the Hispanic men and women, or Latinx men and women, and then also our indigenous persons of Native Americans, men and women, they were not completing these degrees. But we still were accounting for almost 50% of the country. If you look at about 2050, we build almost 50%. Like right now, African American and Black people count for about 12 to 13%. But either way, we were contributing to a large amount of the economic capital in the United States. So researchers start to ask the question, well, why don't we tap into these individuals, why aren't they earning degrees? And so what you see is there's this big STEM or STEAM push. You start seeing STEAM certified schools. You start to see researchers in the higher education field start to research what was going on between the secondary school to post-secondary, and then even to career. And what you saw at each one of those stages, Black men and women, Hispanic men and women, Latinx men and women, and indigenous persons continue to drop out at every stage. And that's when they developed that leaky pipeline. So when I got to graduate school, I already had the lived experience of being in biology, chemistry, pharmacy, all of those great things at both two very large, predominantly white institutions, Research One institutions on top of that. And I wanted to really examine that because now I'm in higher education, right? So now what I'm doing, I'm taking a retrospective look, not only at my lived experience through a qualitative lens, but I also now want to quantify that to see what is really going on. So I have data from the National Science Foundation, the NIH, all these great places, data that they've collected through different reports by the Obama administration. So now we're trying to tackle this. So now I'm trying to condense my work into one semester that people have been studying this for the last 40 years, ever since the Hidden Figures movement with NACA, when it turned to NASA, trying to go to HBCUs and tap these mathematicians, tap these human computers or brains as they call them, because again, the talent was always in these populations. It was just not tapped into. So of course, to have this to save our economy, the academic side of it, at least we tapped into these margins. And so what I found out, regardless of data, regardless of all the research that went into it, there were still barriers in place that were causing these individuals to drop out. Some of those were exposure. So a lot of the people that I talked to, a lot of the research that I read talked about these individuals, these already what you consider marginalized populations, particularly Black women living in rural areas or living in urban areas where there was not a lot of access to AP classes or to dual enrollment classes where you're learning college level skills, and they wrap that up and summarize that into academic preparedness. Were they academically prepared to basically reach the rigor of post-secondary work in these very rigorous courses? Because we all know sometimes we get to college, they have these weed out courses. Everybody want to be a doctor, everybody want to be a scientist, etc. But again, you go through basic biology, chemistry, some of these calculus, statistics, and they're difficult courses in your first year, and they're weeded out because again, they weren't exposed to pre-cal or pre-algebra in high school and middle school like some of their white counterparts, because again, either the school district didn't offer it or they didn't have teachers that were able to prepare it, or the school's overcrowded. We can go on and on about that. Finances were a major issue, particularly not necessarily in the P through 12 sector, but at least once they got to graduate and undergraduate courses, right? Because we all know that the rate of education in the United States is exponentially increasing. So these individuals if they could not financially afford to stay in a university or financially afford to do an internship or a researchship where you may not get paid, they were not able to participate in such studies. And if you're going to be a true academic, a true scientist, you need these on your CV. You need these experiences on your resume because again, you're getting real life experience in the lab, right? And if you're
Right,
at a
right,
university that may not be research one, maybe research two or three, they might not have additional funds in their budget for a professor, an assistant professor to sponsor you to stay over the summer or go study abroad or spend the time in a lab, etc. Right? Finances were an
right.
issue. Then you also look the mentorship component, right? Visibility matters. I talk about this completely all the time. I grew up in a rural area. I can count on my hand the number of Black scientists and teachers that I saw on a daily basis, right?
Right.
And so
Me
for me,
too.
you can't be what you don't see. If you don't look out the window and see trees, or you're exposed to another city, or you don't live outside the city in which you were born and raised, you never know the experiences outside of your small little microcosm, right?
Right.
And so
Exactly.
one of the things that I really, really stressed in my research and in my writings and my talking points is that these people have to actually be able to physically and visibly see people. I never forget the one thing that made me want to go to the University of Georgia. I actually got a pamphlet from us. He was a few years older than me in high school. His name was
Hmm.
Jabari Wayne. He's a doctor now, but he was one of the first Black men that I knew that went to the University of Georgia, and they were a STEM major. So when they
Oh.
sent me that pamphlet in the mail, I'm like, hey, look, there's someone at a school that I want to attend. It's 45 minutes from my house.
Hmm.
Two, I knew about the UGA extension program through 4-H. So that was another caveat for me getting exposure to STEM. And three, there's a Black man on this flyer that looks like me. It might not be a Black woman, but there's a Black man and I know them, right? So that lets me know that this is something that is attainable for me. We've had the same education, P through 12. This is realistic, right? And so I talked about visibility and how important that is. And then in addition to that, a lot of the barriers that I also saw was a lack of diversity in faculty. So again, there's this major push. Many
Right.
I need to call books and research and recall all that data now for a podcast. There's so many books and articles about this, the lack of diversity in faculty, not only at HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, where you see a great number of faculty and staff in the STEM disciplines that are what we consider minorities, Black,
Hmm.
Black, Hispanic, Indigenous persons, but there's very small amount compared to probably your undergraduate populations that are minorities, right? Because again, if you go back 30, 40 years, if these people aren't graduating these disciplines, how can you expect them to be faculty down the pipeline, right?
Right.
There's additional barriers even once you get into the faculty position with promotion, tenure, hiring, even recruitment and retention of Black faculty on these same PWI campuses. So not only have you
Wow.
navigated it as an undergraduate and a graduate student, once you even get the job, you have an even more additional hurdles to deal with based upon your race or either your gender. And we can go
Right.
on and on because again, coming back to my DE&I job, these are the things that I'm trying to circumvent or prevent. Because what I saw in my research, you saw that the bias that people have either about women and women being not associated with STEM or STEM careers, women being associated with family or liberal arts, you saw that bias come up for women. You also saw the bias come up with the gender and the description
Hmm.
to intelligence. You saw the rigor. Are women academically prepared regardless of the race?
Hmm.
And then you also put racism on top of that, right?
Right.
So now if you compile gender discrimination and disparities and you put race on top of it, how do you expect these people to thrive 4 years in college? And we talked about with this with 10 toes theory of persistence, where you don't feel included and you don't feel like you belong. So I take all my research and all this data, I
Girl.
compound it, and I talk about these are the recommendations for institutions if you want to build a reputable and want to build a intentional program about recruiting, retaining, and graduating and career placing these students because they're talent. They have the talent. Some of them just may need some additional academic research. Some of them may need some additional financial aid. Some of them may need some mentors. Because again, we're not going to talk about this because this is for another conversation. But even when you do have faculty of color or Black and Indigenous persons of color or faculty of color on your campus, you do extra taxing or extra burden on them because you also then ask them to mentor the students that are there. So there's
Right.
this additional invisible caseload that you see because they do need the mentoring, they do need the networking, they do need the support. And if you don't model them, sometimes, additional support they may need is a cohort model. There's many universities that have successful STEM programs, and what they do is even in the undergraduate, They either put their students in living learning communities. That's what happened for me at Georgia Southern. There was a
Okay.
living learning community. Now, ask me how I got in the business dorm. We'll talk about that later. But I
Okay.
was supposed to be in the STEM living learning community, right?
All right.
Because that would have put me in the same dorm with all the other men and women that were going to be
Well,
engineering, science, because the whole point is that you supposed to study together. There's a lab that's like a computer lab on each floor, and you're supposed to help each other cross learn,
right.
etc. Right? So most of the schools that do that type of work or establish these type of identity groups for these students, like you see NSBE's, National Society of Black Engineers, you see SWE, Society of Women Engineers, you see the Chemical Society of Women, Tri Beta had a special part for biology, women in biology. So you see these types of student organizations that need to be formed, and then you also see this additional support. So basically what you're doing is you're providing a foundation for individuals that never may have had this foundation, this landing pad. They
Right.
never have been had this much access, because again, we already know outside of this, the academic rigor that is in STEM, these students are still having to be college students. They're having to navigate other financial or maybe even societal burdens, like we talked about the social justice and going through COVID, virtual learning. There's so
Right.
many other additional pressures that people are having to navigate. And then you ask them to go and study and be a part of a particular discipline that's going to take an additional 30, 40 hours outside of your traditional day, or
Yeah.
another 30, 40 hours in the lab, another 30, 40 hours publishing, another 30, 40 hours, thinking, okay, after college, even with my bachelor's degree, and this is where I fell into it, Ansley, you're going to need to go back to school, because if not, what are you going to do with a traditional bachelor of science degree? Are you going to go to
Right.
graduate school, or are you going to go into the academy? For me, at that point in time, at 22 years old, I didn't want to go in the academy, right? Or I didn't
Mm-hmm.
want to go teach at a high school or middle school level, because that's what my mom had done. I wanted to do something different. And so that was what led to my graduate degree program that I have. And then I guess we'll get to the other part about how I got to my PhD program a little later. I feel like
Well, I was
rambling.
just about to
But
say, Dr.
mentioned,
Boudiker actually interviewed herself, and so I'm really not needy for this conversation. I just should have
oh no, I
sent
just talked
you
about
the
stuff,
Zoom
and
link and was
look
like,
at my cool glasses. I'm supporting the Black artists for Black History Month. Sierra Lynn, the artist Sierra Lynn, Black History Month support. She talks a lot about self-esteem and how important it is to embrace the arts. That's the A in stream arts. So we gotta put that out there. I did take some art classes in undergrad. Had to balance
look.
myself out.
So, Dr. Booker, you are totally well rounded. You can totally do this interview by yourself. You are a wealth of information, and you've answered so many questions that I had, but did not have to get to, because in your talking points, you were definitely able to hit them. You did talk to us about a lot of the barriers that
Yeah.
students face in
Mhm.
STEM, that then leads to them not STEM not being diverse and inclusive. Some of the things that you said was they have, well, what I see: mentorship, visibility needed, lack of exposure,
Mhm.
um, and lack of financials and able to for them to
Mhm.
even be there.
Yeah.
And so then you went on to talk to us about some of the solutions that would help with those barriers. And
Mhm.
so you kind of given us this whole well-rounded view of you as a DEI person,
Well, I
right?
say
A
DEI,
DI.
but my technical title is D&I, but I
Okay.
put the equity part in there. But because I think equity and justice is
Equity.
the next part
Mm-hmm.
on this
It really
continuum,
is.
this social justice continuum, trying to make good on some of these deliverables, right? So you
Right,
get the
right,
diversity there through admissions and recruitment, right? You get the inclusiveness there through programming, different departments doing programming, welcome events, academic service caps, making sure students feel included. But then if you want to make things more equitable, you really have to dig deep into the roots to see what some of the barriers may be for different
right.
populations, particularly on these campuses where you have a large population of Black or Indigenous people of color. And so that's where the equity comes in. And then justice, if something happens, say for instance, a professor or a staff member makes a microaggression or continues to make a chilly environment or unwelcoming environment, you have some justice there that is then served. You know what I mean? So
Right.
again, these things take all different shapes and
People are
forms.
held accountable.
Those were just some of the examples that you see, because we talked a lot. We haven't talked about this, but a lot of times the justice and the equity comes usually when students make these demands and these changes, right?
Right.
When you see student organizations say, hey, we as a part of the engineering society, we demand that we need more faculty of color in our particular department, or we write a letter collectively saying that this particular individual is not welcoming, not inclusive. They do gender roles and gender stereotyping. There's so many different TED Talks on
Yeah.
experiences not only that people of color have had, but women, LGBTQ plus, people that have been discriminated, their weight, their religions, particularly their accents and languages. Sometimes if it's not your first,
Yeah.
your undocumented status, because if you're bringing these individuals into an environment where they were not previously established, right, you're going to have to make some concessions or additional concessions to make them feel welcome, because they're new to you and they're also new to this environment, right?
Right.
And so
And you
again,
bring up a lot of points. I just want to say this. I know this summer we had this whole thing when everything happened with George Floyd, we began to shut down everything. And one of the things was to shut down the academy, shut down academia, shut down STEM. And we talked about there was especially on Twitter, just a conversation about how there is a lack of diversity a lot of times in STEM. And
mhm,
you are
yeah,
mentioning some of the things because I think about it, especially when we talk about languages and how,
mhm.
we
And
will
xenophobia too.
in labs just
Mhm,
because they can't understand the language of that
mhm.
we speak, and so then we just assume that they can't understand, period.
Yeah.
But just and even that, seeing how that plays into gender, you talk about that a lot. And how, and this is one of the reasons why I'm here, because I, as a woman, a black female in science, already know, and I had to be more aggressive, my aggressive self, when I
Mhm.
was in the lab and wanting things, because if I wasn't, then I always say you just get walked right over.
And
Or
that's the
walk,
part of that allyship too. And I'll give you another perfect example of that, Dr. Wyckoff, because I never forget when I was an undergrad, no one wanted to be my lab partner, right? I
mm-hmm.
never did it. There was nothing, said. There was a lot of nonverbal communication. And
Yeah,
so because I lived in the living learning community and everyone had to take the basic science courses, I never forget there was a white young man, his name was Daryl. He knew me from my dorm and he was like, Ansley, I'll be your partner. And see, that's what allyship is about, because again, you're in these unwelcome environments. I think I was only
right,
one or two Black women taking science at like 8 o'clock in the morning. And regardless of the time, there's always going to be very few women, especially as you go through these higher level courses, right? But that just
yeah,
shows you, because people have already bought into their bias. They've
yep,
already bought into their stereotypes. So they've already stereotyped me. Like, hey, here's this little country or rural girl. She speaks differently than us. We don't know her. She's Black. How do we even know she's going to pass this class? So people have already
right,
judged me day one before I get in the class, right? And then there's no one there to support me to say like, hey, let's match up partners. Like I even had trouble. I didn't even get, I think the next time I bonded with a white female, because me and her both were in the pharmacy program. And so
mm-hmm.
pre-professional pharmacy program, and we became lab partners, because the same thing happened again the second year. No one wanted to be a lab partner with, and I had proven myself. We both had got A's. No one wanted to be either one. So we bonded and we shared. And so again, that's that allyship. We have to stick together and we have to stop these types of behaviors, and get and bring awareness to why these behaviors exist, right?
And I
So
like that you
because of your
said,
bias and your discrimination and your stereotypes, we got to talk about this. Like, why are you not making this a welcome environment? And so for a lot of times what will happen, and same thing happens in careers, once you even navigate the undergraduate and you get into the
mm-hmm.
career, you will have the
Let's talk
same thing
about
to
it.
happen once you're actually on the job. People automatically thinking that you are a secretary, and not there's nothing wrong with administrative work at all, but you automatically assume because I'm a minority, I'm a woman, that I'm here to make photocopies, or because
Right,
when I'm in the staff meeting that my point is not relevant to the conversation. You know what I mean? Or you over talk me, you overlook me, you over speak me, or you don't put me up for the tenure packet, or you don't bring me up for review. You don't recruit other people to, I've been in several schools where there have been only one faculty of color in an entire department of 20, 30, 40 people. To
I
me,
do
that's
know.
unbelievable. So like you said, when you go back to shut down STEM, shut down the academy, march on STEM, black in the ivory, all of these hashtag conversations that we had over the summer, this was a part of the social justice movement, calling these
Right,
things out, bringing accountability to these institutions. Because again, a lot of these institutions are federally funded. you're getting money, and you're definitely getting money based upon the number of, if you're a minority serving, Hispanic serving, institutions, Hispanic designated institutions, you're getting additional supplements from the government. So you have to make good on those promises and those concessions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. And one of the things I just want to point out, I know we were talking about allyship, but I want to go back to you saying that, having those support groups or learning communities, because
Yeah.
when I think my trajectory, we had a department, a minority, it was called MORE. Anyway, I can't remember what all the acronym was. But in that is where I ended up finding the partners. So, when you go into a classroom and you see the other black person, because you all are in this program together, you all automatically end up pairing up.
Mhm.
So even though I was in a predominantly white institution, I always felt like I was really in my own little HBCU, because we
Yeah.
had created this community.
Hmm.
And so we would all, we would schedule things together just so
Hmm.
you got somebody in that
Yeah.
class who
Hmm.
who you're going to be able to study with, who you can be able to
Hmm.
lab partner with. And that was how I believe the upperclassmen taught us, was like, hey, you all are the study partners. So find out, get with them, get your schedule together,
Hmm.
and that's your partner to circle with. And then we tutor you when you come to the program.
But see, and that's another additional struggle that you even had to figure out, and you had a network, and someone had to come back and tell you. Whereas there should have been a program that was like, like we have here on Mercer's campus trio programs, right? We have this particular trio called Opportunity Scholars. And so they
Mhm.
build all that in for students, because it's very difficult, even within, being a new student away from home, that now you got to make your own network, right?
Right.
So why can't institutions establish this network and provide advisors, provide counselors, these additional support groups for these individuals, right?
I think
Because you
they're
want to
afraid
be
to.
in this community. And I'm not saying that institutions don't do it, because I know several institutions that do it well. And I just mentioned
Yeah.
our program that we have here, where they do like a pre-prep or a pre-collegiate program, and the students get credit, etc. They meet Black faculty, they meet Hispanic and Latinx faculty. So they have these things. But I will say that my institution, even though there are very few African American women, even African American professors in the STEM programs, I will say both of my undergraduate and my graduate institutions, a lot of the white male faculty supported me. And then also a lot of the female white faculty supported me. I did a lot of my undergraduate research on the white female faculty members,
Hmm.
because regardless of race, they still understood the struggle, and they still
Yeah.
understood the difficulties that it is navigating this world, if that makes sense. When I
And I
got to
would
the
say,
particular
yeah.
program, it had to be white male, because those were the faculty members that were working in this particular department. And I never forget it, because I just had to, one day I just had to have like a candid conversation, and was saying, these are some of the additional barriers that I have to deal with, being a Black woman, being the only Black student sometimes in class. And that was very enlightening for these individuals, because they did not have no idea, because no one had brought that awareness to
Hmm.
them, that this is why you may have some students struggling mid-semester. Maybe
Right.
these additional things that we need to talk about. And I'm not going to put all that honest on the faculty members, because that's an additional burden to them and their job. But I think we have to really do, as a collective university or collegiate community, kind of trying to address some of those concerns, if that makes sense,
Right.
because
And I
everyone
believe,
has a part in it. But again, where does your part, where is your niche?
right. And I think you make the good point of at least there being one faculty member that uh actually sees the student, actually
Hmm.
sees them, acknowledge that there is an issue, and then wants to work on that. For us, it was Pat Marstella, Dr. Marstella. All students who were pre-med knew that you need to get her as your advisor, because she had found her niche. She was that caring professor
Hmm.
that understood our struggle and really would navigate us through. And she would
Hmm.
make that path to other faculty, because you wanted to do research, because you wanted to do this or that,
Got it. Hmm.
easy or smoother, so that you could get to those. So all of this, it's just in a circle, having great allyship, having great programs that then help support you while you're in college, and then being able to find that network also on your own. And I think we have to just point out to students too, you also are your own best advocate. Like
Yeah,
at some point, you have to pick up your own,
mhm,
you know,
and and
cross and say,
uh,
hey, I can
mhm,
do this. Because I know I got in a lot of faces of faculty who I was just a person in their room until I started going to them and was like, hey, I need for you to explain this. I don't know this. Let me see you in your office hours. Can you write this recommendation? Here's a letter already. It's just I was very forward a lot of times because I realized if I wasn't, it wasn't going to get done because they don't have to seek me out, but
large
I
classes
seek
too.
them out.
Yeah, especially those classes, everybody talks about, those classes of 300 and 400,
Girl, yes,
lecture
I
time
went to
classes, especially
theaters
at the
in
larger
Emory.
university. We get lost in the numbers. So one piece of advice I never forget, one of my high school Cambridge, I think she was a high school Cambridge teacher. I don't want to name names. I don't want to mess up anyone's names or forget names or anything like that. But she was like, Ansley, when you go into these large lecture halls at a large university like you're going to, you're going to make sure that you either make friends, not make friends, but you acknowledge the teaching assistant in the room, and that you also acknowledge and you go to the office hours of the professor if you're having difficulty, you don't understand. Do not suffer in silence. So I tell my students all the time, do not suffer in silence. If you do not
Wow.
understand, send an email, go to office hours. And I never forget, that made, even as a senior, that made the biggest difference in one of my classes that I took from a professor. And he was like, Ansley, I've had you in several other classes before. I know that something must be wrong with you because, you haven't been doing X, Y, and Z. And because I had that communication, that open line of communication, and because he knew me as an individual student out of like 300 or 25, I think the next year, or 50, whatever it was, that really helped me. So you have to make these relationships with your professors. Because like you said, when you need a letter of recommendation for graduate school, this is where those professors are going to come in handy. If you are failing a
Exactly.
midterm and before you drop out of the class and get a W, this is where office hours come in handy. And again, not everyone is going to be friendly and welcoming. Oh well, you know what you're there for. Sit there and take it. Take that,
Exactly.
not take punishment, but just sit there and navigate to get to where the ends is. What
Right.
ends or means is for you to get a better grade in the class, right? The other thing
Mhm.
I was going to say, for people sometimes like myself, and I'm pretty sure you're like this too, we were always kind of been naturally inclined or studious, right? And so for
Mhm.
me, when I got to college, I think I got my first C or D on a paper or assignment. I was in shock. I was in utter belief.
Girl.
This had never happened to me. What are you saying? People already patted me on the head and told me I was smart. What? No, that's not true. Take this back. Can't be mine. Got to be somebody else. This
Right.
must be
Right.
Ansley. I know my name looked hers, but no, it's not hers. But
Classes,
anyway,
and
everybody
I
talks
say all
about,
that to
those
say
classes of 300 and
I had to
400,
suck up my girl, yes,
lecture
I
time
went to
classes, especially
theaters
at the
in
larger
Emory.
university. We get lost in the numbers. So one piece of advice I never forget, one of my high school Cambridge, I think she was a high school Cambridge teacher. I don't want to name names. I don't want to mess up anyone's names or forget names or anything like that. But she was like, Ansley, when you go into these large lecture halls at a large university like you're going to, you're going to make sure that you either make friends, not make friends, but you acknowledge the teaching assistant in the room, and that you also acknowledge and you go to the office hours of the professor if you're having difficulty, you don't understand. Do not suffer in silence. So I tell my students all the time, do not suffer in silence. If you do not
Wow.
understand, send an email, go to office hours. And I never forget, that made, even as a senior, that made the biggest difference in one of my classes that I took from a professor. And he was like, Ansley, I've had you in several other classes before. I know that something must be wrong with you because, you haven't been doing X, Y, and Z. And because I had that communication, that open line of communication, and because he knew me as an individual student out of like 300 or 25, I think the next year, or 50, whatever it was, that really helped me. So you have to make these relationships with your professors. Because like you said, when you need a letter of recommendation for graduate school, this is where those professors are going to come in handy. If you are failing a
Exactly.
midterm and before you drop out of the class and get a W, this is where office hours come in handy. And again, not everyone is going to be friendly and welcoming. Oh well, you know what you're there for. Sit there and take it. Take that,
Exactly.
not take punishment, but just sit there and navigate to get to where the ends is. What
Right.
ends or means is for you to get a better grade in the class, right? The other thing
Mhm.
I was going to say, for people sometimes like myself, and I'm pretty sure you're like this too, we were always kind of been naturally inclined or studious, right? And so for
Mhm.
me, when I got to college, I think I got my first C or D on a paper or assignment. I was in shock. I was in utter belief.
Girl.
This had never happened to me. What are you saying? People already patted me on the head and told me I was smart. What? No, that's not true. Take this back. Can't be mine. Got to be somebody else. This
Right.
must be
Right.
Ansley. I know my name looked hers, but no, it's not hers. But anyway, and I say all that to say, I had to suck up my own pride and go to the academic resource center. That is something the
Exactly.
most underutilized service, I will say, on any undergraduate or graduate campus besides the library.
Hold
Go
up
to
right
these
quick,
places.
Ansley. Hold up.
Okay.
I told myself I was gonna make it through. Then I was like, oh no,
Okay. So I think you're still recording, right?
it might be.
Okay. On my side, it says still recording.
It's fine because I can edit it, so I'll just cut it out. I'll chop
Yeah,
up the video.
I think the last thing I was saying was like, like going to the library, going to the academic resource center, building your own study groups, building your own test banks and study banks and things of that nature. And then the other thing I was going to mention, sometimes that I found in my research is that one of the other great facilitators, my dog has joined the conversation.
Oh
And look, her bow matches my glasses, was that, you have to have some level of intrinsic motivation and
hey,
resilience,
yeah,
right?
that's real big.
And
Yeah.
whatever measure that is, if it's the measure of a mustard seed of faith, whatever that may be, you gotta find that balance, right? That study
Right.
life balance. You gotta have some tenacity, some grit, some wherewithal, because you're gonna deal with these barriers, you're gonna deal with these obstacles, but on the end of it, there's a diploma. On the end of it, that there's a signing bonus or a graduation or a barrier that you've broken, a generational curse that you've broken. So again, there has to be some level of resilience and determination. And that was one of the things that I found when I interviewed all the women that I interviewed, right? Because they none of them were at the same school, none of them were in the same state, they were different ages, and some were even international, and they talked about navigating their classrooms like a war room. They knew they were going to battle every day, whether it
Yeah.
was with their professor from whatever reason, whether it was with their classmates, whether they're still dealing with home life issues, or even once they navigated all that and graduated, and now they moved either to graduate school or even for their career, they're navigating other circumstances.
Hmm.
And so again, I think that is very important. Whatever you got to do, positive affirmations, study guides, vision boards, to achieve that side of the dream, I think is also very important too.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that everybody has a different. I think something that helps them make them through the hard times. For me, definitely at the time it was religion, God,
Mhm.
prayer, all of that. And then I'm one of those people. I always create a close knit group of, of friends to have support and to help me through the tough times. And definitely when I was in graduate school, had a little cohort that I still call upon now. And in college, I can usually just call out, but I usually surround myself about 4 or 5 people.
Mhm.
But you do have to have, like you said, at first intrinsic motivation, and then have some of that tenacity inside of you to keep going even when it gets tough, and then to have that support group. And I think when you have that tri
Mhm.
pillar, that helps definitely lead to success. And those
Yes.
are the things that we really want to promote in the STEM Lab podcast, just how to be successful no matter where you are in STEM. And I think that resonates in all aspects of it. Well, Ansley, you again are such a wealth of information, especially when we're talking about your career. And I just love the fact, that you were a STEMinist and then you moved on
Yeah.
to be,
To activists, like
I
I'm so
know.
I'm really into this.
And so I think people need to hear that. You can go again. We
You
talked about
gotta
having that
pivot.
boxing
You
STEM.
gotta leverage it. You have to
Yeah,
leverage these opportunities, because to me, I think there's
leverage
no
the
limitation to
opportunity.
gifts
Yes.
that you can have and how you can use and explore your gifts. That is something that
Hmm.
I found out not when really 2019 going into 2020, because again, like you said, I was from a STEM background and this is the research I had done. But and I just thank goodness for the opportunities that were provided for me, and the people that were trailblazers and really poured into me. Like, people don't understand, you can have a mentor at the age that I am now. You know,
Yes, you need
being
them. I
something,
have one. Hey.
you still got to have these support groups. Sorry, you still got to have these. She just want to make an appearance. You still got to have these areas in which you think about daily. Like right now, I still set strategic goals. I still set smart goals, things that I want to do, things I want to achieve. Because again, like you said, you talk about this podcast and you manifested it, right? We talked about these books, we manifested. So there's more, I think, that we still have to give and still have to offer, because
Amen.
again, these things are not going to be solved in one day at one university by one person. It's going to take
Exactly.
a collective group, collective action. And this is where the equity and the justice part comes in, taking this research, taking this data, and don't just, oh, this is my dissertation, put it on the shelf. No,
Right.
people need to hear about these experiences, qualitative and quantitative, because that's what brings about change. You're going to do the lived experience story to introduce a narrative, but you're going to use the whole card data and the math to support your evidence. You know what I
Right.
mean? And so that's something
Girl,
that
you said it.
I'm still wrestling with now, because my professor is like, Ansley, you need to turn this into a district. You need to, it's already a dissertation, but you need to turn it into a book. You need to turn it
Publication.
into a story. You need to do more publications with it. And that's something that I'm still working to do, but there's only so many hours in a day. But I think it's important because you don't want to shelve these stories. You don't. And I think
No.
this is like the perfect time to expose this and bring awareness to this, because people are becoming, diversity, equity, inclusion, microaggression, sexism, racism, homophobia, questions about weight and gender roles and ageism and ability and disability. People talking about this stuff now. These are buzzwords.
Yeah.
These are your local water cooler, where before that was something HR had to talk
Right.
about and deal
It was
with,
more
right?
so
And now
taboo. We can't talk
everybody's
about it.
kind of talking about it.
Yeah.
And it's very unfortunate that it took so many lives lost for these conversations to happen.
I know,
That's so
right?
unfortunate. But again, I do not think those individuals died in vain. I do not think those people that endure oppression and suppression, those things went in vain, because again, they laid the foundation, or they are the shoulders in which we stand. Because this
Amen.
conversation has to continue. We cannot stop it today. It has to go, because I don't want my son or daughter to ever walk into a room and say, I can't do something because someone else has limited their expectations of me.
And
That,
look,
to me,
uh,
that's not a part of my purpose. That's not a part of my passion. And again, like you said, we get so emotional about this because we
right,
are so invested, right?
right,
It's so hard when you code switching and soul switching from day in and day out, and then you have to deal
girl.
with social injustice, the pandemic, and you're trying to change the world, and you're trying to bring about cures and change, and and still that's still not enough. You know what I mean? And
Right.
so again, I struggle with that, and thank you for using this platform and this vehicle to disseminate this information, because there's someone here, there's someone that's going to hear this and listen to this and say, you know what, that's my story. If they can
Yes.
make it, I can make it. There's some young girl, when they go through real impact and they go through these virtual classes, they go through these
Mm-hmm.
camps, you know what? Oh, Dr. Booker made it. Dr. Wathall can make it. I can make it too. Now
Yes.
I can see myself being the vice president. I can now see myself being a surgeon general, because you know what? You now see someone that looks like you, and that reflection is
Amen.
staring back at you.
Exactly. Look, you have said such a mouthful, Ansley.
Kind of preach,
Like
kind of preach.
I'm like, look, I'm gonna have to give you your own corner on the STEM Lab podcast.
I'm back.
Something I've been
Come
thinking
through.
about. I'm just saying, when you come and just discuss all of the diversity and inclusion initiatives in STEM, I mean, really and truly, because it's a discussion. You touched on so many things that we can't even cover in this podcast. You got to come back. What I do want to move us toward, though, is our next segment, which talks about just
Okay.
you. And I know you told me the story before, but I think it is so important to let our listeners know how STEM began in your life and how you
Mhm.
ended up liking STEM and on the pathway to STEM, because a
Yeah.
lot of our listeners are of our age bracket and they do have children and they'll look to try
Mhm.
and help them move along. So
Of
would you
course.
just tell our listeners how you even got interested in STEM or in the makings of being a STEMinist?
Yeah. So, okay. So I have to credit both my parents. So for different reasons. So,
Okay.
growing up in rural Georgia, I had the pleasure of growing up in Edenton, Georgia, which, if you don't know, is like the home of Rock Eagle 4-H, right, in the state of Georgia. If you're not from
I
Georgia,
didn't know till I met you. Yes.
did I know? I will always blast that and tell about Alice Walker and Joel Challen Harris and 4-H, because those are my things. Those are my jams.
It's the
Those are my
walking
jams.
history book.
That was my look. The Color Purple came out the same year I was born. Rock Eagle and 4-H. Yep, yep. Rock Eagle and 4-H introduced me to STEM and science and presenting and public speaking. And so I joined those groups in like the 5th grade. So I stayed in 4-H from like the 5th grade to like the 11th grade. I was on the math
Wow.
team. I was on the science team. We were like state champions at one point. And this was unheard. Let's just go back, because
Okay.
this is a book or a movie.
We're the back.
Who's gonna play me? But I go back to this. So I go back to my parents really quickly. So my mom was a second grade teacher for 40 years, and my dad worked at Georgia Power for many years. And so, I was first born. My mom was super excited, giddy. We at this point, Sesame Street is hitting. That's the thing. You teach your kids Sesame Street and you
Yes,
learn. And
yes.
I went to great grandma's daycare in school. So I was already academically prepared. They were testing me for gifted classes in
Okay.
kindergarten, because I
Yes.
was that much more advanced, because I'm listening to my mom. My great grandma's teaching much as, she only went past like third or fourth grade, but she teaching me as much as she knows. So now I'm like 6 with at least a third or fourth grade education, because she's doing what she knows, right? But I'm also outside because she is gardening and I'm exploring animals, birds, worm. I had like pet chickens, all this kind of stuff. But what you don't know is experiential learning. But we didn't know that's
Right.
what it's called, watering her plants. That's botany, right? I'm just thinking I'm
Right.
planting her plants in the summer in Georgia, and I get to see all the worms and the birds, and she's telling me about the different birds.
Girl,
Well,
yes.
that's learning. That's ornithology. That's botany. That's
Okay.
biology. That's physical science. But I'm playing with the rocks in the driveway, bringing the pretty amethyst ones up there, because I'm like, oh, that's my birthstone. But no,
Such
that's
a
geology.
geologist
That's
already. Yes.
geology. But because Black people weren't exposed to these words, and most of our parents and grandparents didn't go past high school, let alone
Right.
college. Most of us are first generation. So they're pouring into me, right? So I get there, get tested for gifted, blah 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 blah, and I go through these different classes. So one of the things I think by third, fourth, fifth grade, my mom's Scholastic Book Fair. I love the book fair. I love birds. I loved outside. I had plenty of pets. My dad was into hunting and fishing. So there's always was something for me I had pets, turtles, fish, all kinds of stuff growing up, right? So Scholastic Book Fair, I was really into reading. My mom was we had a library card. Every time we had to reading program, all this kind of stuff. So one of
Mm-hmm.
the books that really intrigued me, and never forget, it had a kind of brown cover. It was called like Black Inventors in America. It was Scientists and
Oh.
Black Inventors in America, right? It kind of reminded you, I got this book on my desk, but it kind of reminded you of this book right here. And so I would read about these inventions. At the time they had people in there, like George Washington Carver, and his experiments and all those kinds of things. You're just reading about all this stuff, and Black Americans in there first, and I'm not just saying this because
Okay.
Black history, but these things were true, right? So this is the first time in these black and white pages that I'm seeing scientists and inventors that are Black. And I'm like,
Right.
oh,
Right.
Garrett Morgan made this, and this person did the first, like the filament for the light bulb was a Black person. The Black
Yeah.
woman did the straightening comb. So
The
I'm like,
stoplight.
we made the ironing board, we did the alarm system, the GPS, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
no one ever told me in school that Black people had made the cotton gin had made so many contributions to American society, and not only American society, world society, industrial. We
Right.
had our own mini
And
industrial
global
revolution,
economy. Yes.
global economy, right? So, because the narrative was only talked about enslaved persons and their contribution to
Right.
society economically, and how America was built on our backs, et cetera, et cetera. We're not going to go into that narrative. But again, you see now the Black excellence that we talked about in a book this thick, page after page after page, right? So I'm
And
like,
Ansley, for our listeners who can't
yeah.
see, what is the name of that book that you keep
So the
showing
name of
us?
this book I keep holding up, and I bought this one. It's by Winnie Warren. It's called Black Women Scientists in the United States. So I actually used this
Hey,
one for my dissertation. But
gotcha.
the book I was talking about was a much smaller version of that book that
Right.
I was able to reference. But so I have to say, I was introduced to a lot of this stuff through reading, right? Then I go in 4-H. I started doing senior projects. I started doing going
Mm-hmm.
to science fairs, science lab. I think I ended up with like a scholarship to the University of Rochester because of my science, science experiment.
Wow.
I did like governor's honors. And so again, and I will not take nothing for this journey too. Even though I was in a rural area, a lot of my early science teachers were Black men and women. I
Mm-hmm.
kid you not. I kid you not. I never forget.
Oh,
So sixth grade, especially in middle school, for some reason I had like 5 or 6 back-to-back Black teachers, and between fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. Like just
right.
about every last one of my science teachers were Black, from physical science to anatomy to all these things, right? And so, like I told you, we also, and this is how I met my other friends. So at first I was kind of lonely, bullied, weird, nerdy kid.
We always,
And so I
yes.
met my other friends in middle school because we then got tapped. They took all the people with like the highest science and math grades or whatever they were, and they invited us to be a part of like beta club. And then that turned in fifth grade in beta club. Then that turned into, we want y'all to be on the math and science, like what do you call it? The little buzzer
Uh,
team. Oh, Jesus, what is it?
Olympiad or a bowl? No, you
Olympiad.
said
Yeah. So I never get. Miss Michael put us all together, and we became, and like literally we were touring all over Georgia, like South Georgia, winning. We ended up becoming state champions, and it was so crazy because I think that was the first time that someone saw it was 4 Black girls and 2 white boys. Matter of fact, the 2 white boys, one went to Harvard, one went to MIT. Now, not saying
Okay.
that the Black girls did not do well, because we all became teachers and lawyers and doctors too, but that just shows you the caliber of 6th and 7th grade students at that time, if that makes
Right.
sense. You know, I
No,
want
I
to get my
do.
master's degree. Another one went on to the military and does great thing. Another one went on, is working on her doctoral degree now. But that just shows you the level of caliber that we had in these little 6 and 7, and it was 4 Black girls. I never forget
Right.
it. My mom and them sold like fish plates and all kind of stuff and cookbooks to raise money for us to go to these different tournaments on the weekend. And we
Mm.
like, they like, because I never forget, they like, what y'all studying at the school for? You know, most people doing sports. I did sports too. But like when I wasn't doing sports, you know, we got a thick science book. We going through math problems and science problems. I never forget my older cousin, he was in, at the time, he was at the University of West Georgia. Like, I think I was doing like 12th grade math problems in the
That's
6th grade, because we had to do that for the math and science Olympiad team. You know what I mean? And so again, it's just experiences like that. Then when I reflect back on it, it's like these are the things that you're learning. These are the things that you're becoming, and you really don't know why you're doing them. I just like to win, so I've always been competitive. So
she sound like
I
just like the
want to
wind.
get, yes, I want to have the high score. I want to answer the most questions. So I've always been like that. And then I had my 4 Black girls. I was like, oh, we walking in this room. It's white students, Asian students, you know, and you see 4 Black girls, and then you
You
see,
about to cut up.
it was a diverse team too. So we had a 2 white male cohorts too, and I mean we was going to killing them. So I never forget, we end up, and the first time we lost, and I think it was so devastating. We had made it all the way to like, I think like the national tournament at the Grand Opry. That was the first time I left the state, I think,
Oh
for
wow.
we made it all the way to the national tournament in the Grand Opry in Tennessee. We were in the Grand Opry Hotel. And I think that's when we lost and got put out the tournament. But you could tell when we walked in the room, it was like,
Yeah.
because that space had been dominated by white boys, white girls, and Asian boys. So when you
Well,
saw
I
4
want
little
to
Black
point
girls,
out
it
too
was
that
like,
y'all were from a rural country too, a rural county.
yeah,
Like
but
people don't usually think in rural counties you got anybody
that's
smart.
not much
They
talent, but
think everybody dumber than a donut.
yeah,
So really, you all were coming into these tournaments, and
we
people from big
and it's
cities are
crazy
like,
because,
"What?"
yeah, and it's crazy because it was more or less like all of our parents were educators.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we all kind of had that up, because our parents knew each other. They went to high school and stuff together. But I think we all had that kind of motivation and background and additional education at home, you know, like
Right,
that
right.
started at home. And so I say I did all those kinds of things. Of course, I did sports too, because my mom wanted me to be well rounded. I did basketball, played basketball, I ran track, and those kinds of things. Well, and that's where my daddy came in at. But I kid you not, I'll tell you this funny story too about how we do this experiential learning. I learned how to do percentages and fractions because my mom liked to shop. And so we would be in the store and she'd be like, Ansley, because I could do math. I used to count on my fingers so bad, because that's how I do math. And so my mom was like, can you do the 60% off, 70% off? You know, this is before they would put the little card in the back that would tell you how much stuff was. So I was
Yeah,
like my mom's like little calculator, like, oh mom, that's gonna be 60%. So that's going, and so we would have this game and she would see how close I could get to the total, like in the
yeah.
grocery store or at
Yes.
she's gonna kill me for telling this story. Um at the store. And so I was like, you know, and then again, that's the experiential learning, you know what I mean? And things
That
of that
is
nature.
beautiful though.
Like all that stuff, I think really in its totality helped me to be really great, and just be invested in love science, because not only did my mom support it, my grandma, my cousin, my dad. I tell you 2 quick stories too. So I never forget one time, and he out of school now, so I can tell this story. My
Okay.
older uncle, he's a little bit older than me. He was doing horrible in what's it, not ornithology, entomology, study of bugs, right? They had to do
Okay.
it, like he was doing horrible in it. So I never forget, I was like maybe 5th, 6th grade, and I love bugs. I don't know what little girl love bugs, but
I
I
don't
love
know
bugs.
either.
And so my mom was, so Chad was like, oh, I'll give you like $5, you know, if you go do my project for me. And I was like, okay, bet, $5. I did his whole senior entomology project. I pinned the little bugs down. I went and caught
No.
all the butterflies, all the bees, and I
Oh,
put that thing together.
that's
I put that thing together, and I was like, "You owe me your high school diploma," you know. And but it was stuff like that, because like the family supported me in doing that. Like the time they tell the story all the time. Like the time I came in the house, And I said, my granddaddy raised little chickens. So you know, like the little baby chicks. I said
Yeah.
the chicken had he called them beaties, whatever they're really called. I can't think of it right now. And I said the chicken thing had broke his leg. And so I made like a little splint and I put like some gauze around it. Like, you know, my mom was like, I don't know what to do with her, but she nurtured it. She got me
Yeah.
books. She got me, like, I used to love Carmen Sandiego. I used to love Miss Frizzle, Bill Nye, the Science
Yeah.
Guy, Dexter's Laboratory. Like, she fed, like, anything that I wanted to do, she fed into it. Like I said, she sold those chicken plates, those whatever cookbooks, because she wanted me to do these things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She wanted me to be involved. And she did the same thing for my brothers too. So again, I think it's just that family environment and that support, because even now as an adult, even when I was in college, I think that support, that science, that push, that even everybody in my family, regardless of men, women, old, whatever, they were always happy. You know, like even
Yeah.
now, I never forget, and I was in high school and I was going to do governor's honors. They wrote a big thing up in the paper about it. And so it's like me standing beside my fishbowl with like a herringbone necklace and a FUBU shirt. That's the contradiction that you didn't want to see. Like that right there. I had a big silver herringbone chain and a FUBU shirt.
But it's real. I mean,
But
what?
it was real. We were
I'm a
bringing
scientist,
purple
but I
flags.
like
We
FUBU
were
and my
bringing
hair.
flags.
Did you have an asymmetric haircut? That's what's gonna take it all
No, I
away.
didn't cut my hair asymmetrically until I was in college, and I was doing a Bonner Brothers hair show. But going back to that story real quick, and I never forget, like I said, my dad was instrumental too. You know, he would be at work, and I remember he called me one day. He was at work. He's like, Ansley, and I was like, huh? He's like, and what is this you in the paper for? I'm like, I don't know. He's like, the people at work want to know what a spectilium mossy is and what a beta splendid. And I was like, oh, that's my science project. Let me tell you. He was like, okay, short version answer. Because I used to always get excited like I'm doing now. He like 5 minutes. Tell me what it is. Because he wanted to go back and work and tell his friends
Right.
he
And
knew what
tell
my science project was about. Because nobody at work knew what my science project was about. But I'm saying, and you know, it's so crazy too, even being from that country, take nothing for that too. We used to, the Perry Fair used to have a STEM and science fair thing too, a part of it. They might still
what?
do like an agricultural component.
Yeah.
We used to enter those and make science and board displays. I never forget getting the ribbons and stuff for that. So that was another thing, that even though you might be in a rural area, there's still other opportunities. Now
Right.
I didn't do Future Farmers of America because I wasn't into cows like that. But even at the time when I was in high school, we had an international winning team. So again, you
Yeah.
know, it's just science. Science can take different turns and different molds. You know,
Yeah.
I was just kind of in a different lane, because then I think I started getting more into cheerleading and running track, because I was doing well in that too. But all those experiences were great. I have a million more, but for the sake of the podcast,
Yeah.
I
Well,
want
yeah, and I
you
just like for
to.
people to realize that even though we are scientists, you know, we are well-rounded individuals,
Yeah,
and
yeah, of
you know,
course.
our story started young sometimes, and sometimes just
Mhm.
in the middle. Somebody may have caught us in high school, but I think it's so important to see us as not what I call 2D flat images,
Yeah,
but we
of
are
course.
3D
Mhm.
individuals that are full and robust and full of. And why I love your stories is because they're always so funny and so full of joy to
Yeah,
me, because they have, you know, parents, us, and uncles. It's just like a
yeah.
whole family. This one
It's
little
a
girl
whole
has
family, like the
round this
whole
whole
family. That was my
community
village,
up.
raising this one child. I was like raising Dion. Like that's a whole village trying to raise Ansley.
Yes. It is so
Oh,
beautiful. So, you know, I can hear you tell those stories all the time. I'm always like, so tell me, you know, about you, your dad, and the fish. You know,
oh yeah,
it's just one
we
of those
did
things that I
that.
like hearing. I think our listeners should, you know, have a little peep into that. Well,
Yeah.
look, I've enjoyed talking to you so much. And what we normally do as we round out the podcast is ask this question to all of our guests. If you could look back on your career, your trajectory in STEM, and look at the timeline, where in that timeline would you um, give yourself advice to persist in STEM?
Ooh, oh, and you know what? The last time I figured we did this, we did this. I started crying. I would not cry this time.
Okay.
But
Good
I
grief.
think because I didn't tell this part of my story, I made everything so rosy and so beautiful, you know, because there's how the extra. But there was a dark side to this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the dark side was that I was bullied, really third through about fifth, sixth grade. And again, I was bullied and ostracized because I was different. right?
Right.
My name was Ansley, which was different. I was into bugs and nature, and like my mom put us on nice clothes and things of that nature. But I was so different from your average third, fourth, fifth grade little girl, right? I was like
Right.
the chicken little, the odd man out. I didn't have glasses at that point in time, but if you could think of someone that was very scholastically driven, that makes sense, kind of like what people would quote unquote call a nerd.
Yeah.
And so, that was just unheard of. I didn't get out this flavor and this extraness until I was a little bit older, but I just knew I liked what I liked, right?
Right.
And
Right.
because of that, I spent a lot of time with my teachers because my mom's a teacher. So I knew this, I thought that's who you're supposed to spend time with. So I really didn't interact. And so that ended up causing this kind of divide between me and some of my earlier friends because it was kind of like, oh, you a teacher's pet, you a suck up, you this. And it really turned into some really nasty bullying, almost to the point. Well, it did turn to the point with a lot of physical altercations and things of that nature, with the bullying and stuff. And
Wow.
so I would say if I could go back probably to that somewhere between, probably fifth grade was probably the worst. Fifth grade was definitely probably the worst. And I would go back to fifth grade Ansley and I would say that it's gonna be okay. You know what I mean? All that
Yeah.
stuff that you other people calling weird and different and just, not attractive and not fun, that's gonna lead to your career that you have in your 30s. You know what I mean? That's gonna lead to you being on a stage at UGA getting a TED talk about how you make other girls feel comfortable in their skin and how you make other little boys feel okay, doing STEM and science because it wasn't quote unquote the norm thing to do. But now they making billions of dollars off of Richter sets and plug in this and anatomy things and drones and that nature for students and trying to push that model where even though it's so uncommon that it's okay, you're going to be all right, just keep doing what you're doing, which I initially did. But again, there was a lot of sad times in that because I felt, I was told that I was different and something was wrong with me. And I just thank God and I thank my family for being supportive. Because like even though I might have heard that from my friends at school during that age and that time period, I heard the complete opposite at home. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
I would say just keep striving. If anything, you should have found your middle school friends probably fifth grade, because then you'd have knew it was more people. There was more people out there like you. You know what I mean? I feel like the little girl.
Yeah.
What was her name? With the little glasses. Oh my God, what's the girl? I can't think of her name. But it's okay. You're unique and fun. It's gonna be great. Your extraness is gonna be great. Keep being you. Keep striving. And again, one day you're gonna be an inspiration to other little girls. So
Yeah.
it's gonna
No, I
always
appreciate you. I
yes.
really do for saying that because I think for most of us who have gone on the STEM journey in our older, we all had that period of time
Mm-hmm.
where we were the odd kid out, where,
Yep.
people made fun of us or,
Mm-hmm.
bullied us. And even, me trying to raise a STEMness myself, she went through that period as
Yeah.
well. And so it's sad that it doesn't end. And I had to tell her that her mama went through this too. Don't worry about
Yeah.
it. They'll see you when you in Walmart grown and be like, I always knew you were gonna be somebody. Did you?
Yeah.
I remember your jokes. If they didn't sound like, oh, Sabrina, I know you're gonna be
That's
somebody.
not what you said at me at the lunch table, and that's not what you wrote in that note.
Hello, hello. But
That's
you
not what you
don't
did. You
know
put right
as
here in the
kids,
bathroom. But we're not gonna bring up all that. We're not gonna.
we not look, we grown now. We not gonna bring that up.
You know.
But the beauty of it all is that those things really help shape who we were because I think it
Yeah,
gave
it
us that
does.
resilience
It
that me
builds
and you were
thick
talking
skin.
about.
It builds resilience. It builds that
Mhm,
determination. So
mhm.
sometimes you have, and now I'm getting. I feel like I'm getting into preaching now. But sometimes you have to go through your test to be a testimony, and not necessarily for
Yeah,
yourself, but somebody else. Because I think this is also part of our testimony, our story. Because
it
now,
is.
like you said, you're raising Maylene. I'm helping other girls in real impact. Even the students that come to my office now at Mercer University and other places. So now I use that hurt, that pain, that sorrow, and I have channeled it into something positive, something beautiful, something that I can use to empower and embolden somebody else. Because
Yes.
I think sometimes you can't get so caught up in the past that you get stuck. You know,
Amen.
you gotta keep moving forward. You gotta keep pushing towards the future because what you went through, all things will work out according to his will, according to his good. All things will work out in a perfect order, in a perfect plan. Your steps will be ordered. You had to go through that because, again, some, like, people say, oh, you're born with self and you can, your self-determination, your self-efficacy, but sometimes that stuff is cultivated, it's made,
Exactly.
or
It
even if
really
it's not,
is.
even if it's not made, it's cultivated. It's like,
Mhm.
you have to put carbon to make a diamond, intense pressure. The same stuff here, the same stuff we're dealing with. And, at the time, you're sad, you're crying, you going home. Why nobody like me? I just like to play with the birds and the dogs and the fish. I'm different. Why am I different? And just thank
Right.
goodness for people and family members that supported it. Like, oh, that's fine. You're doing great. We see you in the paper. Keep going, keep going, keep going. And even to this day, those things, those positive affirmations are good to hear.
Yes.
Like you said, like Dr. Walker, keep going. Your students love you. They love they love your teaching style. You're the first Black professor they ever had. Keep going, keep pushing, keep pushing. Because, again, you
Yeah.
gotta keep pushing. You can't become stagnant. That's the one thing about change. If you're gonna be a catalyst for change, you gotta do it every day, every day, every day.
Say that. And so look, I don't think I'm gonna
Mhm.
end it on there. If you're gonna be a catalyst for change, you got to do it every
Mhm.
day. And that's
And
what we're here about at the STEM Lab podcast, is to be a catalyst for change, to highlight those women of color in STEM so that others can see the greatness that we have and that we are projecting out into the universe. And so I really want to thank you for being here, and you and Brownie working out. She was good. I was so happy. Oh,
sleep, but look at the camera,
if
Brian.
you listen, if you can see her precious dog, you can go to YouTube and find it. But hey, well, look, I thank you so much for taking your time out with us today and to be here on the podcast. It has been a wonderful conversation. It is always good to talk to you. Again, you're so knowledgeable just about what you do and how can we move forward with diversity and inclusion in STEM. And so I'm always proud of the work that you do. Looking forward to all those papers. Next time you're on, we'll talk about your book, your TED Talk. Look, y'all, this girl is busy. So she got so much more to say and tell us, and we'll look forward to hearing some of that in the future. Until then, thank you, Dr. Booker. I appreciate you so much.
You're welcome.